You know, we have so many great guests on the podcast, don't you think?
Yes, and you know, today is no exception. And I also know you're going to be sharing in a couple minutes who that guest is going to be.
Yes, and I also want to remind everyone that if you like a particular episode here on Thought Row Podcast, don't forget to tell us. Reach out either on our website contact form or social media and drop us a line.
And we do our best to share that feedback with our guests that we've had on the show. Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a wonderfully creative week. I'm Rod Jones, and we celebrate what people love to do creatively by giving them a voice so you can learn from their experiences in life.
Yes, and I'm Inci Jones. Welcome to Thought Row Podcast. We invite you to subscribe wherever you listen, and we focus on sharing with everyone how they can think, be, and live more creatively with their own passions.
Inci, now it's time to tell our listeners who our exciting guest is today.
Okay, well, today's guest is Isabelle Knight, and she helps owners, foundations, and authors increase their impact with brand building strategies, PR, and she is a senior publicist.
You know, I also want to mention that she has worked with some highly recognized celebrities and some world-famous authors, and I mean world-famous.
Yes, she has.
Speaking of famous, how about one of your famous quotes?
Okay. Well, here is a quote from a very famous person that I know that we're all going to know, and here is the quote. As a writer, one of the things I've always been interested in doing is actually invading your comfort space, because that's what we're supposed to do, get under your skin and make you react.
Do you want to tell us who that quote's from?
Oh, yes. His name is Stephen King, a little well-known author.
Yeah, somebody knows him. You know, boy, isn't that a truthful take on what a good writer should try to do and accomplish?
I think so. You know, you want to have people, as they're reading your chapter, to not be able to put it down because it's so compelling and so emotionally riveting.
Emotionally charged in his case.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
And it makes you think too, I suppose. Good writing should make you think.
It does.
And have imagination, right?
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
Well, good quote, Inci.
Thanks. So, okay, so let's go on to our interview with Isabelle Knight. I know you guys are going to enjoy it.
Isabelle, welcome to the Thought Row Podcast. Our listeners, and us too, for sure, are always interested in finding out how to build our brands. And I have to tell everyone, you are an expert in that area.
Yeah, so true. Hi, Isabelle. Building your brand can be confusing. And I know everyone wants to know how they can achieve results that they're looking for or trying to achieve. And I'm sure everyone will have a takeaway from this conversation today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Well, before we start the interview, we always ask our guests what they had for breakfast. So what did you have for breakfast, Isabelle?
What did I have for breakfast? It feels like a long time ago now.
I know it's a few hours ago.
Yeah. I had an oat milk latte and a bagel.
That's really healthy.
Yeah, for sure.
And I love the bagel. Yum.
Well, sort of. Yeah, no, I'm an oat milk convert for sure.
Wonderful.
Well, that sounds highly nutritious.
Yeah.
So, Isabelle, why don't you tell us where you're originally from and maybe where you're currently living now?
So I was born and raised in a city in the north of England, UK, called Leeds. And I now live with my family in southeast London.
Okay.
Well, so you're in the city.
You are definitely in the city.
Yeah, I'm definitely a city girl. Yeah.
Well, when you were growing up, you must have some interesting childhood memories from Leeds.
Yeah.
Anything you have to share there?
So a childhood memory that I was going to share is, so it's actually not in Leeds. It's actually from France. So my mother is French.
Oh, okay.
So I grew up spending all of my school holidays pretty much in France with my family over there. And So one memory that I have, so we would go to the south of France generally for our holidays. And I once remember going to the fair. Now in France, you get amazing fairs that happen in the evenings, where the kind of, especially coastal towns and things, sort of come to life. And there's lots of, and it's very family oriented. It's not so much about just, for grown-ups sort of evening entertainment. It's expected that you would take your children out as well, because the evenings are warm, and it's all kind of a bit buzzy and nice atmosphere. And of course it's cooler. So it gets very hot there in the day, but it gets cooler in the evening, so people can go out with their kids. And we once were in one of these fairs, and we saw a performer, and I'm showing the memory because it's kind of relevant to sort of my life and inspirations, both professionally and creatively.
Yes.
And we saw a performer and it was a lady who was dressed up like a kind of mechanical doll. You get ballerina boxes, music boxes.
Yeah.
Where the little doll kind of turns around, and it's a wind-up thing. So she was dressed up as one of these wind-up dolls. So essentially it was a human wind-up doll. And she danced in that mechanical fashion, and I'd never seen anything like this before. And it was super fascinating. And then afterwards, the other part of it I remember is that she actually signed a little postcard for everybody. So that was the first time that I felt like I'd met a celebrity performer and she'd given me her autograph. So that was...
Wow, what a great story.
What a sweet memory. Oh my goodness. I could see that being really charming as a child, seeing this.
Plus, your eyes would be wide open watching her.
Oh, definitely.
And you could relate to her having dolls, etc.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
A living doll.
Yeah. A living doll.
A living doll.
That's a living doll.
Oh, that's such a sweet memory, Isabelle. Thank you for sharing it. Okay, so now I think we're going to fast forward to today. And we know that you have a background as a successful publicist for over 20 years. First of all, tell us what a publicist is and does.
So a publicist is somebody who proactively essentially disseminates information to the media. So a publicist typically works in the creative industries and entertainment, because these are the industries that are sort of on that proactive kind of machine to get messages out there to their audience via the media. And I read something recently that says that described publicity as kind of infotainment. And if that was a real word, you could argue that that's essentially what it is. It's giving information to the public via the media that is in some way going to also be entertaining or engaging or compelling. So it sets itself apart from advertising in that sense, that it's not the same as selling something per se. You're not creating advertising or marketing where you're directly selling a product, but you're talking about either a product or, typically, we use it in the entertainment world. So in the film, music, TV, books, anything like that, where we can really kind of create an engaging conversation around the thing that we're trying to draw people's attention to. So the job of the publicist is to make that happen, essentially.
That sounds exciting. And the infotainment is actually a word that bounces around the United States fairly often. And do you mind telling us who some of the people that you've worked with?
Yeah, so I started my career in music, and in the jazz and world music world in London. So I worked for the company that used to produce the London Jazz Festival. And at the time, so this is 20 years ago now, at the time that was a really big deal in London. It's kind of morphed and changed over the years, but it was a huge occasion where artists from all over the world would come to the London Jazz Festival. So one of the very first famous people I ever got to meet was at the London Jazz Festival, and it was actually Eric Clapton, and they kind of don't get much bigger names than that.
Right.
And he'd come over to see a very, very famous jazz trumpeter called Wynton Marsalis.
Oh yes, we know who he is.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, he plays with the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, and they'd come over to do a gig as part of the London Jazz Festival. So I worked in music for a couple of years, and from there I went into film. So I've worked on huge movies, movies like Harry Potter, Disney movies, the kind of big Pixar movies back in the day. So I've worked on kids' films and grown-ups films, Tarantino films, and then more recently working in TV production. So most recently I've worked on the J.K. Rowling's Strike series of novels, which is her detective fiction series.
Oh, sure.
That was adapted for BBC TV. So I worked with the production company that essentially turned those books into TV programs. So that's so I kind of went from music into film and then into TV.
So when you were working with a production company, turning those books into TV programming, what exactly was your position? What did you do?
So I had to be on set quite a lot, which was obviously great fun. And to work with the actors one of the big roles of the publicity, we call it unit publicity because you work with the production unit. So the unit publicist has to produce what will essentially become the kind of basic notes about the film that will then be distributed to the press afterwards, so that journalists can talk about and write about the movie. So fairly often you will actually interview the actors about the movie or the TV show. So you'll get to know the actors fairly well in most cases. And the director and the producer and the executive producers. So you kind of have to be across the show in terms of what's happening in the show, who's in the show, what all their roles are, and be able to kind of put together concise notes about the show, interviewing everybody. And also the other part of that job is to give kind of exclusives to certain media outlets. So say the big film magazines and that kind of thing would take a journalist onto set to see people and get the kind of first scoop about the movie or the show.
Oh,
so that's another part of the job. So yeah, it's an exciting job, and it's quite as you can imagine, it's quite sought after amongst publicists.
Oh, I can imagine. I bet. That's the upper level of publicity. When you work with all these creative people and you get to know them pretty intimately because you're having conversations with them and they're telling you their thoughts and their ideas. And was there anything in common when it comes to how they wanted to promote themselves? I mean, what were they projecting to you?
So, I mean, a couple of projects come to mind here. I don't know if you guys would know a TV series called Mrs. Wilson. So Ruth Wilson, the actor, she did His Dark Materials here recently. I don't know if you'd know that. And The Affair, the TV show that was also based in the US. But I worked on the TV show that was based on her grandmother's own memoir. So that was a really interesting project because it was about her own family, and it was a case of working with her to make sure that the family was presented in the right way, as well as her own brand, as well as the show. So quite often you're keeping in mind lots of different people's, first of all, the agenda of the people making the thing, whose responsibility it is to make a success of it, but also how the people involved are represented, and often how the stories are also represented. So, of course, in the case of the J.K. Rowling Strike series, we're dealing with the very huge brand of the original creator, plus the brands of the production people, the series itself. So you're often working across many considerations. as a publicist.
That's kind of exciting.
That's a lot of coordination. That sounds like you're juggling a lot of different juggling balls.
Yeah, I think you've been actually answering some of this, but you refer to yourself as a PR branding strategist. When you're working with these people, are they looking to you to come up with strategies how they can promote themselves or become more, have more notoriety or highly recognized? I mean, some of these brands, they're known all over the world, virtually by everybody. Is there anything that you can do, or have you discovered along the way of how you can increase the awareness of their brand?
Yeah, well, at that level, when you're working with hugely well-known global brands, often what you're doing is you're managing the brand as much as you are trying to kind of further promote it. So it's a case of this, and this is where the strategy kind of really becomes very important, because you're managing which media outlets you're working with, who is going to get the story essentially, and how are they going to present it, and is it going to be presented in the right way? These are the questions that you have to ask. And as a publicist, you're kind of trained to know, your job is to know how each particular media outlet or section of the media is going to portray something, and whether it's going to be right for your client, essentially. So when I'm working now with business owners and people who are creating brands and building brands, often it's asking the same questions. Essentially, it's asking, well, how do you want to be presented, and where is going to be the best place for you to present yourself in order to reach the people you want to reach in the way you want to reach them. So it's asking those same questions and being strategic in the same way, even if, the kind of stakes, the stakes might not be so high in the sense of, it's different, obviously, working with someone who already has a massive brand, and you want to carefully manage that brand so that it doesn't get out of control, or it doesn't lose any credibility. But when you're starting out building a brand essentially from scratch, you're trying to build, you're building that credibility with those same questions in mind, if that makes sense.
No, actually it does.
Sense,
and I'm curious about the fact that you have to work with so many media outlets. Do they wine and dine you? Or are they always saying, hey, you need to be our best friend because we want to get the story first? There's some of that for sure. There's very much with publicists and journalists, it's a really interesting relationship, as you can imagine. Sometimes sometimes they want something from you, sometimes you want something from them. And quite often there's there are negotiations. There can be quite heavy negotiations sometimes if you have, for example, two big magazines that both want the same story. And sometimes there has to be some bartering, and it can be a little bit of a power play. But generally speaking, both sides, they work together. The publicist and the journalists work together because, at the end of the day, we're helping each other, and in many respects, we often want the same. For sure, you equally want the same outcome,
right? Because they need the content for their outlet, and you need to get the content out. So it's symbiotic, really.
Well, plus, they're relating on Isabelle to help them build that content,
absolutely,
which takes a little pressure off of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
You need a topic.
Yeah, you need a topic. And you need the inside story too, right?
It's true.
And you're only going to get that inside story from Isabelle because she's the one who's directly in contact with the talent.
Exactly.
Yes.
How very interesting.
So, Isabelle, what is the difference between PR, which is public relations, and then being a publicist, which is what you were talking about? Is that the same? So,
there is a difference, and it probably sounds quite subtle, but with PR, PR is literally, public relations, you're literally managing the relationship between you and your customer or your audience.
Okay.
So that can encompass lots of things outside of simply outside of media relations. So PR, can be everything from, how you present in your marketing, in your advertising, in your social media, what your image is and how you're presenting that to the world. Whereas publicity, a publicist is much more, is as I said before, proactively engaging the media, often in a more involved way. So they are slightly different, but people tend to interchange the two terms. So it all starts to become a big blur of one. And often, people use PR now for to describe so many things. I think
including marketing.
Right.
We've been introduced when we do marketing. We've been introduced as people that do their PR.
Yeah, and that's not true.
That's right. We don't think of ourselves as PR agents.
No. And, because I've been in PR now for a long time.
Yes.
I've seen it all as it kind of evolves and grows. And sure, the definitions for sure of PR and marketing have become so kind of conflated and confused.
You've been quoted as saying PR is one of the best ways to create credibility. Tell us about that.
So that is essentially what I say to my clients, anybody who does my courses and works with me. PR creates credibility because what it's essentially doing is giving you an endorsement from a third party. What sets PR apart from marketing and advertising is that you don't pay for PR. So it's not simply an exchange of money for in the industry, we call it above the line and below the line. So above the line marketing and advertising is essentially you're paying to use somebody's platform or somebody's space to promote yourself. And, similarly in terms of social media, that's the way we all promote ourselves now. You're essentially borrowing somebody's platform or space to promote yourself, but you're not being endorsed by somebody else. With PR, you're creating a relationship that then leads to an endorsement. So if a journalist prints something about you and your brand in their newspaper, they're doing that essentially because, we talk about earned coverage. So they believe in you enough to print something about you to talk about you. So that's it. Essentially what we mean by credibility is if you are getting endorsement from a third party, it's so much more powerful than if we're simply using a platform to talk about ourselves or our brands or paying for the privilege of doing that.
Yeah, and it's your job to create the story around that person that is interesting enough to where the media says, oh, yes, we should write something about this person or say something about them. That I suspect can be kind of tricky sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. It's always about looking for the story. What is going to be interesting? Because at the end of the day, for somebody to write about you or your brand, it has to be interesting enough to make them do that. So it's looking for the story, which is why everyone that works with me gets the brand story treatment. Because before we can decide, before we can strategize and say, okay, this is, you're going to PR yourself by going to this magazine or, using this platform, we have to decide, first of all, well, what is your story? Why are people going to care about you and your brand? And that's the very first question that I ask my clients to think about is why would somebody else care about it? What's the compelling story that's going to draw them in?
So that's really interesting because I know a lot of creative people listen to our show and they're always, trying to figure out how to do, because not everyone has the benefit of having a publicist in their lives. And so it's very interesting when you say that to me because you have to make yourself newsworthy as a creative and to get the word out. Do you have, something going on with a gallery, or are you doing something really interesting painting wise or singing wise or, whatever your creativity is. So it's kind of like it made a gel in my head of
tell a story.
Tell a story about yourself.
Yeah, too many times it's just a press release. The press release is who, what, when, where, and why.
But then everybody goes,
cares.
So what?
Yeah, nobody goes, so what? They hear the same thing over and over.
Right on.
That's right. Which is, I get loads of creative people, whether they're authors or, artists, people that have created something and they want the thing they've created to speak for itself, to sell itself, basically.
Right.
But nothing sells itself. A piece of art won't sell itself. It's the story behind the piece of art that is going to compel people, that is going to sell it.
I hope everyone listened to that very carefully.
It makes it so much more. And artists are worse when it comes to, if they don't like my art, too bad. They need to see the story is in the art.
Right.
But I mean, after all.
Well, there's so much emotional capital you put into your creativity. And then all of a sudden you think everybody else is going to understand it and it's going to be great. But sometimes not.
Well, what makes Van Gogh interesting? It's his life story. It's his story.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
exactly. What's the one thing that people who don't know anything about art, what's the one thing they remember about Van Gogh? That he cut his ear off and sent it to his lover. Yeah.
Right. Which
I thought was a good strategy.
Because it's a great, it's a great story.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't send me your ear. So, okay. All right. We were talking about different careers and things like that. And I am curious, how many different careers have you had or occupations before you became a full service PR expert? Was this a career that you always wanted to do, or how was the series of events for you?
I mean, in the kind of short answer to that is really boring, in that I've basically had one career my entire working life. But the long answer to that is that I've worked for loads of different companies, loads of different projects, and I've gone through, we could call it 4 industries by now, because I've gone from music to film to TV to books. But I've always worked in communications. And when I was as a child, I wanted to be an author, and that's still on the to-do list, by the way.
Good.
And then when I was a bit older, I wanted to work in PR. I didn't know what it was, but we had a TV show here called Absolutely Fabulous in the 1990s.
Oh, I love that show. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, with Jennifer Saunders.
Yes,
love it.
I love that show. It's extremely popular. Extremely popular.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that they'd come to New York just for a weekend. Anyway, I don't want to interrupt you.
So I was a teenager when that show was super popular, and I was probably like 15, 16. And I thought, wow, that looks so glamorous, and had a vague idea that they were doing something with famous people and magazines. And I already knew I loved writing and I loved stories. And I went off to do English literature at university. And after that, and I thought about becoming a journalist, but then I thought, actually, I just want to go. At the time, as a young student, I just want to go and have fun, meet famous people, go to parties, have a good time, and get into the creative industries, not really knowing what PR and publicity was at that point. So my very first kind of jobs out of university were in marketing, and I got a position as a marketing assistant at the music company that used to produce the London Jazz Festival and the World Music Awards in London. Mm-hmm. And it was an amazing, first job as a graduate. And that's what launched me into that whole world. So I went very quickly from marketing into publicity.
Wow.
And that's where it all started.
Our listeners want to learn from your expertise. And can you share with us just one strategy? And I think you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but the one strategy people can use to build their personal brand?
So the one strategy is to get to grips with your story, with the why do you do what you do, whether you're an artist, a musician, a writer, whether you have a business, you're an entrepreneur. What has led you to do the thing you're doing? What's the inspiration? We want the emotional inspiration behind it. What's the story? How did you get to be where you are? Figure that out, and everything else will build from there.
That makes sense. I like that. Yeah. You know, I forgot to ask you because I know we talked about on our initial conversation with you, our phone call, you had mentioned you have a singing career. I know this is kind of an off take from what Rod was talking about, but I would like to know about your singing career. So yeah, as well as wanting to be a writer when I was young, I also wanted to be a performer. An actor or a singer, but so I did quite a lot of acting as a young person, and then as a teenager I was in an opera company called Leeds Youth Opera. So I'd sung all my life, but then started to take it more seriously in my teens, and we did fully staged operas. I was in a production and a production of Into the Woods by Stephen Sondheim. Mm-hmm. When I was 16, and I had singing lessons, and from there I went on to sing in choirs. So I sing with big London choirs, and I'm a classical soprano soloist, and I sang with the London Symphony Chorus, and I even auditioned once to be in English National Opera. So I kind of flirted with singing at a serious level, but I still sing. And yeah, it's my kind of big passion and outlet. See, that's really wonderful that you're able to express yourself musically that way. I think that's really important. Aside from your publicity and PR.
Well, it's a total enjoyment, right?
Yes. And it's all for you. It's all for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Although I suppose you could start a public relations program for your singing.
That's true.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
and then unfortunately, it'll wreck it because then it won't be as precious to you.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. Yeah, you want to kind of keep something sacred. Yeah,
that's so true. So, let's see here. I wanted to know. I know we were going to talk about the exposure about creative people. Always needing exposure. And I think that it's especially true of artists and book authors. What simple and practical things can they do to create the exposure that they want? I know you touched on it a little bit earlier.
So with book authors in particular, it's again, it always starts with the story behind it. So rather than using the book itself, what's the story behind the book? And then I'm running a course for authors right now. Mm-hmm. I'm working on this with the people in that group. It's figuring out where your ideal reader is. So where do they hang out? What social media platforms are they actually on? So the people that you think are going to want to read your book, who, when you wrote it, who did you imagine it was for? Then figuring out what networks they're hanging out in, what media they're consuming, what podcasts they listen to, what blogs they read, all that kind of thing. Work that out, and then from your story, figuring out the messages that you're going to share. And one big thing and this goes for all creatives and authors, is figuring out your timing and how much time you need to give yourself to get the information out to your audience. And if you are working with the media and you are working with the press, is making sure that you give yourself enough time, for example, to have a magazine article written or somebody on a newspaper to review your book, for example. Because one thing that loads and loads of authors do is they wait until the very moment that their book is out before they start to actually tell people about it.
Oh, so you should preheat.
Yes.
The oven here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad you shared that because we have a lot of our listeners are authors, writers, and it was interesting to find out about your course. So when we do our show notes and stuff, we'll put that in so people can learn more about that.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
You've been sharing, we've talked about this, and I'm still pretty fascinated about stories because I'm always trying to craft mine, and everybody I know in the creative world is trying to craft their story. Is there any tip that you could give on how people should craft their story and maybe how they should share their story, like through social media or what have you?
Yeah. So to craft it, I'll caveat this by saying it's very difficult to hear your own story as an objective listener because we're all so close to our own stories. Mm-hmm. But it's being really honest with yourself and sit down in a room and don't think of it as, right, I've got to write my story because this is a marketing exercise and, the world is going to see it. If you approach it like that, you'll never be able to do it. So approach it from point of view of, I'm literally just going to write the story of how I came to be here today doing what I'm doing. And so when I do these sessions with people, that's literally what I say to them. I say, tell me the story of how you came to be here right now, doing what you're doing, writing the books you're writing, running the business you're running, producing the work that you're producing. And I often say to people, start as early as you like. It can go way back to childhood, or you can start somewhere in the middle. But what we want to do is find the patterns and the themes. So, most people, we've all done a kind of, an assortment of things in our lives. And we have, different passions and different interests, etc. But what are the patterns and themes that start to emerge? So, for example, somebody could be writing a book, could be writing children's books, and actually that passion comes from they're really passionate about helping children read and giving them that focus and that engagement to help them to read because nobody gave that to them when they were children. So it's become a real passion for them in their lives to enable that. So it's always looking for, well, where did this passion and this motivation come from? And asking yourself that, and either speak it out loud and record yourself saying it, or just scribble it out on a piece of paper initially. Because the moment you start thinking, the moment you start thinking, this is, I've got to write something that's polished and finished, and because everyone else is going to read it, is when we start to self-edit. And when we self-edit, we miss out all the good stuff. We take out all the stuff that you think, that's irrelevant. And all the irrelevant stuff is nearly always the most interesting stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
For other people.
Yeah. I like that advice, though, that you're absolutely right. You do self-edit and you're like, oh, nobody's going to want to hear that.
Well, especially if it's kind of something personal.
Yeah.
But sometimes things are, not too deeply personal,
right?
But it's the personal things that make you human and make you interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And then, and when it's really personal stuff that you never want to share with anyone, that's okay. The beauty of this is you get to decide which bits you share and which bits you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's never about making yourself feel uncomfortable and putting things, for example, on social media that you don't really want people to see, but you think you ought to because people have to get to know you. It's about deciding which illustrations you're going to use to make your point.
Well, for some, social media has become a confessional.
Yeah, for some people.
Yeah,
that's true.
Ad nauseum.
Yeah, but sometimes I think it's the way people present it. I think if you go, like Isabelle's saying, if you make it more human and more about yourself and personal, it's great. But if you're just going on there to rant, I don't think that's okay.
To testify.
Yeah. Truth.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Well, Isabelle, you've been living an exciting and creative life, not only with the people you've worked with, but your own career as a singer. Is there any advice you would give to people that want to be more successful in general?
Gosh, that's a big one. For me personally, it's always about, following your interests and being honest about what that is. What do you enjoy doing? I've always enjoyed working with people, for example. Working with other people is really, really key for me.
Yes.
I'm not somebody who likes to sit and work in isolation, for example. Mm-hmm. So, thinking about what are the things you actually enjoy doing.
Okay. That's very good
following
advice.
that.
Yeah.
That's very good advice.
We didn't touch on this, but I know you also are a speaker. You want to share with us a little bit about what that is all about?
So I do speaking in organizations and with groups, and obviously that's mostly been online for the last couple of years. But I speak with various groups of people. So, for example, I spoke with musicians last year. This year, I've been asked to speak to theatre directors about how to go about promoting their brands and start thinking of themselves as brands. So that's generally what I'm doing in terms of speaking. Speaking with various different groups of people, creative and business people.
Oh, perfect.
That's great.
So what were you going to say, Angie?
Well, I was curious what number one mistake people make when trying to promote themselves on social media that you've seen.
The number one mistake I think people do when they try to promote themselves on social media is the first thing they do is go and look at what everybody else in their genre or in their field is doing, and then decide what they're going to do based on that. So whether they think they go and look at everyone and think, oh, well, she's doing that and she said this and he said that, so I've got to do something similar.
Right.
And that's the absolute worst thing you can do. The best thing you can do is to ignore what everyone else in your genre or in your field is doing, and begin with what you want to do, what's true for you, based again on your own story, and create your messaging from there rather than feeling like you have to do it the same way as everyone else.
Yeah, for sure.
That's really good advice.
Brand, I want to jump into this real quick. Brands and businesses become how difficult has it been? Because I know you've had some experiences this yourself, Isabelle, in the current environment, with COVID, and it's affected virtually everybody all over the world. How have businesses and brands managed to navigate through that?
Well, obviously it's been a hugely pressured time for everyone. And, for myself, for my own work, my own business, I've taken everything online and feel really fortunate that I've been able to do that. And many, many businesses have done the same thing. People that can work remotely and can work online and can see clients online. But I think it's just created this enormous pressure now that everybody feels that they have to have a very, very prolific social media presence and online presence. And I think when people are thrown in at the deep end like that, in a kind of, dog eat dog social media, you've got to have a big social media presence or die. That's hugely pressured for people. I think it's the kind of the new age almost that the pandemic has kind of forced us all into, of having to navigate and negotiate this online marketing world. And it's I think it's difficult.
I can see how it would have a lot of impact on you, because we know you as being a very social person, a very articulate person, and you like being around people, and you're on sets, or you're sitting down talking to authors or strategizing with people one-on-one or in groups, and now all of a sudden you're doing all of this online.
Yeah, no, it has. It's been a big change for me, and now I'm now starting to find ways where I can bring things back into the room, back into real life. Because that's definitely something that's changed hugely for me. Because as soon as we went into lockdown in the UK in March 2020, all the film sets shut down immediately. Sure. And they had to come back very cautiously, so that suddenly there wasn't room to have hundreds of people on set anymore. So that did have to change. And doing things like Q&As, with actors and directors, all of that was online. So yeah, for everyone, it was a massive change. So now, for me, like I said, I do like working with people, and that's a big reason why I went into the career I did, to be interacting with people. So that's something I'm looking forward to now, is finding more ways of kind of face-to-face interaction again.
Well, it certainly has impacted Inci and I. In fact, we were actually talking about it this morning, how we don't have any physical contact with other people. We're not going out to dinner,
not like we used to.
Not anything social anymore. Yeah. Biggest social thing we're kind of doing.
It's worldwide.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, that's one great thing about obviously singing in choirs. We are managing to do that, which is brilliant.
Oh, sure.
So, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to have to start wrapping up the show. But before we go, I want to ask you the question we ask all the guests, which is, if you could sit on a park bench and chat with anyone from the past, who would it be?
I've got a couple of people. I think Jane Austen would be one of them.
Okay.
Love. As a lifelong fan of her novels, and that's probably one of the reasons. I think reading her novels when I was really young was probably one of the big reasons that I got so into stories and studying English literature. And then probably someone else like Audrey Hepburn, I think would be a fascinating one. Yeah, for the glamour. Yeah,
I could see that those two match perfectly for you, and I could see that for you.
Yeah, perfect answer. Yes. So, as Inci mentioned, we kind of have to wrap this up. But Isabelle, both Inci and I greatly appreciate your candidness in sharing your PR and branding expertise. I know I learned a lot. I think you learned a lot, Inci.
I did.
And I know our listeners are going to learn a lot. But I have to say, I was especially excited to learn about your singing career. I didn't really know much about that. And I appreciate you sharing how you got into it and all the different opportunities you've had as a singer. Kind of cool.
Thank you very much.
Well, Isabelle, thank you so much for sharing your experiences in life and in business. And now comes the time I let everyone know that if you'd like to know more about Isabelle, we will have links for her under the show guest tab on thoughtrowpodcast.com, so everyone can learn more about her. And please connect with her on social media. And like we said earlier, we will put the links for her website so you can check out her programs.
So thank you, Isabelle, for being with us, and thank you for all the information you shared. It was fabulous.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on. It was great.
I'm really glad you tuned in today. We hope you enjoyed the thoughts and ideas we shared with you.
We post a new podcast every week, so remember to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss an episode. Also, if you're enjoying our podcast, both Rod and I would really appreciate you buying us a cup of coffee. Just go to thoughtrow.com, scroll down a bit, and you can find that link right on our website on the homepage.
It's really easy to do, by the way.
Yes, it is.
And all the money we receive goes to our production costs.
Yep.
And primarily because we want to keep our show commercial free, and we want to continue to bring you the best quality content with great guests.
That's right. Thank you for listening to Thought Row Podcast. So it's bye for now from my husband Rod and I, wishing everyone